Hey everyone, so I am back with my very dear friend, Miss Maria Luz Castro.
Hey,
Um,
Peter.
and last time we met, we talked about kind of how we essentially reinvented ourselves in our 40s to both go back to grad school. You finished your graduate degree in
I did.
mental health counseling with the emphasis on rehabilitation, right?
That's right.
Right.
Rehabilitation counseling,
Very
providing
good.
services for people with disabilities. Yeah.
Right. And we talked about
hmm
how, I am in in graduate school in mental health counseling and probably more likely will be going on into the doctorate into clinical psychology. But we talked about, of course, about
hmm
how our lives change and what were the impetus for that allowed us to kind of reinvent ourselves in our 40s and divorce and all that stuff.
Hey.
But, you know, but I wanted to change topic a little bit today and cover the issue of race.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a very, very relevant and hot-bedded topic these days.
Yeah.
I mean, rightfully so, of course.
hmm
But I wanted to take today's discussion. We don't want to take too long with this, but I want to take today's discussion to talk a little differently, specifically, sorry, as it relates to uh, children and
That's
their
right.
mental health in this time of racial upheaval, or what I like to define it as racial awakening, if you will.
Yeah, I like that word. Yeah.
Um, and I thought you would be a really good person to talk to because you have such a unique background, right? You are, as you like to refer to yourself, called the colloquial word right now is Latinx, right?
Latinx.
Latinx.
hmm
But I
We
would
can
like
pick at that during another live or another
another live,
recording.
right,
Yeah.
right, right, right. But
Yeah.
you're originally from tell me where you're from again.
I'm
Ecuador,
originally from Ecuador. I was
Ecuador, right?
born
Ecuador,
on the
yeah,
coast,
on the
representing the
coast.
province of Manabí, the town of Bahia de
So
Caracas.
you
Yeah.
are literally you were born in Ecuador, and you're like me. I'm from Jamaica, so
Hey.
you're a straight up immigrant, you know.
I am first generation immigrant, full
Same
blown.
here, same
Yes.
here,
The
same
new
here.
America.
The new America, exactly. But you have a very unique perspective that I thought was
Yeah.
really interesting, and I wanted to use it as a way to how do we talk to our children about race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because your children
hmm
um, are quote unquote biracial,
Right.
right?
hmm hmm
Your ex-husband, the father of your children, is
That's
African American,
that's right.
right? And
hmm
so your children have this unique place in society, you know? So I wanted
That's
to
right.
talk to you today about, to get some of your ideas of how do you talk to your children? And perhaps
Right.
how would you suggest other people talk to their children?
Absolutely.
I'm going to give you the floor.
Well, let me talk a little bit about my experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting to have this conversation. I think right now, all eyes are on white families, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk a little bit about that, about discussing race and privilege with their kids. We're hearing and we've known that Black families uh, don't have a choice, in terms of protecting their families. There is a point where they have to have the talk or series of talk about the nature of the world and how it racializes communities. And you end up living a racialized life despite whether you want to or not, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
about how you're seen. I am a non-Black person of color, and in these set of communities, right? So we're talking about Latinx communities, South Asian communities, indigenous communities. It can go many different ways in which folks within these communities may be melanated, may be of a different culture, but don't necessarily talk about their racialized experience. And then right now during BLM, what needs to be talked about more transparently is the colorism and anti-Blackness that occurs
Mm.
in many non-Black communities of color. And from my understanding too, even within Black communities,
Right.
colorism
Right.
is something that is pervasive and hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
So, with my kids, what's interesting is they're adolescents now, they're young adults, and their father and I, we've always been involved in what's now called anti-bias or anti-racist work. We had different language back in the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they grew up in an environment where it was always discussed, right? And it's an extension of our values as a family. So we'll talk a little bit about that
Okay.
strategy-wise. But I do want to share that their identity was, we always made the room that we weren't going to project their identity on them. And I actually came across this wonderful writing, and I meant to look it up, and I can follow up with this, but a wonderful mind out there did the human rights of mixed race children. And in that writing, something that was shared was that their identity is for them to identify, and that they can change their minds at any point, And honestly, most Latinx people are mixed people, right? Except we've taken this ethnicity and we've created a uniformity that actually doesn't exist, right?
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, the Latinx identity is definitely a result of colonization, right? As a people, we wouldn't be grouped if colonization hadn't happened, right? And I think what happens with the Latinx identity, especially in the US, is that we lose sight that there is whiteness in Latin America, that there is Blackness and indigeneity in Latin America. And what happens here, especially in the media, is that we're lumped into one and we're thought to be one people. But my experience as an indigenous descendant is different than an Afro-Latinx person is different from a white person. So, that's why I think this is the time to really dig into those identities and see, have they been serving the entirety of the community that lives in Latin America? I don't think so. Latinx really erases both African and indigenous descendant people in those environments. So for my children, if you ask them today, they identify as Black.
I see.
So it's not a denial of their Latinx roots. It's how they've been racialized and what they've done with that identity. And that is completely celebrated, right?
I see.
I don't see it as a denial. I see it as them navigating their world and finding pride in, in their Black background and in the strength that it's given them, the resilience it's given them. So those are my kiddos. And it's interesting. I was on a live yesterday talking about, what's the hope? These kids, they stand on our shoulders. So I'm gonna give us props as parents, right? We have strong shoulders, so they see a wider horizon. And I have to say that right now during BLM, it's their minds that are educating us. So as parents, we're in an interesting moment where the teaching goes both ways, where we're there with our values, and then, they're there kind of, how do I say, amplifying or allow or watering and helping those seeds that we planted grow.
Right. So so you mentioned that you and your ex-husband, when you're raising your children, which, by the way, I love those kids. I remember that they were 5 years old. They were just, I first met them at Sankofa Cafe in DC, of course. That's where I met you.
Baba Haile, Mama Shirkiana,
yes. And I just saw these kids climbing trees in the courtyard. I'm like, who are these little buggers? But they were fearless, man. And I looked up, and you were just kind of sitting there very proud. So I remember that sort of thing, in a sense. Would you call yourself a free range parent at that point?
No. I'm actually an unpredictable parent. No. Honestly, I make jokes. I do think fearlessness is something that I've wanted to inculcate into them, and especially when it comes to, if you saw them in a tree, I want them to touch and be around and be one with nature as much as possible.
I see.
I think it's about striking that balance. I'm raising them. We're all raising them for a world that we'll never know. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's about having faith in them, and me modeling that I trust their moves, at the same time inculcating some very important values.
Right. So I want to go back to this thing where you said that you guys really made it a point to let them sort of educate them about who they are, or their backgrounds, and really allow them to find their place. What did that look like when you were talking to them about their various backgrounds?
It's exposure. Right. So especially early on, and we know this from the research, babies need to see a variety of people. And we're talking infants now, because infants can already show racial preference,
Yeah.
if we expose them early on to faces and bodies of different colors, of different
Mm-hmm.
sizes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the non-spoken ways in which you can start, instilling that value that all people are equal and beautiful in their difference, right? And
Gotcha.
then when they were old enough, it's who their role models were, right? We were
Mm-hmm.
very invested in making sure that the authorities in the house, and this is really a good strategy, especially
Mm-hmm.
for white families or non-Black families of color that are invested in tackling anti-Blackness,
Mm-hmm.
make sure that your children see you go to someone of color or a Black person as an authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an authority academically, as
Mm-hmm.
a authority spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
for you to model, hey, I have a question
Mm-hmm.
and it can be answered by this person.
I
These
see.
are the ways, right? Because I think, that a lot of times in that defensiveness, when you're like, wait, I've got Black friends, I've got
Mm-hmm.
Latinx friends,
Mm-hmm.
no one is saying that those aren't genuine.
Yeah.
But what's really important for your kids and for yourself is to humble yourself and say, someone who doesn't look like me, a Black person, an indigenous person, could be an
Yeah.
authority for me. So
Mm.
that was very, very important.
So,
Um,
go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, I was just going to mention my ex-husband, my
Mm-hmm.
co-parent, my friend
Mm-hmm.
is a capoeira mestre.
Mm.
So in terms of culture, it was always around them, right? And in
Mm.
those, in rodas, I mean, it's a full body experience. It's intellectual, it's body, it's musical, in terms of all the spirit of resistance that
Mm-hmm.
is capoeira. So their
Yeah.
lullabies were, ladainhas and corridos from capoeira.
Gotcha. So
Mhm,
for those who don't know, capoeira
mhm.
is a Brazilian martial art style, which was created essentially by Brazilian slaves as a way they were practicing their martial arts, but they masked it by dancing. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
Yeah.
Yes. So enslaved Africans,
Yeah.
there's indigenous influence as well.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
and then we can see, it's a debate, it's a discussion. It's definitely Africans in a Brazilian setting
Yeah, I see.
that were responsible for capoeira, and at the same time, it's a Brazilian kind of expression.
Yeah.
But capoeira is global now, and
Yeah. The,
it's been a major vehicle of resistance. And actually, Thursday at noontime, if you're seeing this week, my ex-husband, my co-parent, Mr. Kojo, through the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, will be talking about capoeira as resistance right now during BLM
outstanding,
efforts.
outstanding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you mentioned all of that, because what I wanted to do is you really hit on a major technique. And essentially, that's technique number one,
Yeah.
is that from a very, very young age, you expose your children to people that look different than them.
Right.
And what you're suggesting to anyone really, particularly, let's say in this case, white parents,
Yeah.
is expose young babies if you can, to people that may not look like them.
Right.
And in
I
a
want to say something specifically
sure,
about
go ahead.
babies.
Yeah.
And this is true of all human beings, but especially as babies.
All right.
A baby has been formed, a life has been formed in the womb. And you got to understand that for 10 months, 40 weeks, I know we say
Right.
9 months,
Mm-hmm.
right? The environment has been the heartbeat, the breathing rate, even the digestive sounds of the mother and the pregnant person, and of the environment, right? Those muffled sounds coming from the families. I bring this up because for infants, biorhythms, your heart rate, your breathing pattern are very important.
Mm-hmm.
And you will basically tell on yourself to your baby
Mm-hmm.
if you're holding your baby and see someone that you
Mm-hmm.
feel is unsafe.
Gotcha.
You're
Gotcha.
communicating with an increased heart rate,
Mm.
with agitated breathing to your baby that an environment, a person is not safe.
I see.
So you have to really do the work internally.
Mm-hmm.
You can expose, but you can undo the exposure
Right.
if for some reason this is not genuine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because your baby is here, and if your heart rate has agitated, your baby is hearing the signal, the non-spoken signal that something is not right.
I see. I,
So so much of this is not only the interaction, but interaction with ease, with
Mm.
happiness, you know, with authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that point to be missed.
Gotcha. And of course, you can speak very candidly about this because for those who may have watched the previous video, in your former life, you were a doula.
Oh no, forever doula. Not
Forever
forever.
doula.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes,
I might not do many births right now, maybe two
yes,
or three, one or
yes,
two a year,
yes.
depending on the year. But yeah,
Yeah, gotcha.
that's my fuel.
That's your
That's
fuel. Yeah,
that's my well.
so we're talking about a technique which is I'm sorry, I have my
No
phone.
worries. Life
Um,
happens.
we're talking about children in the early stages, right?
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
talking,
Hmm.
what you're describing is really from birth to about 3 to 4 years old, right?
That's right. Hmm.
When did you start to? Now you're sending in that instance, you're sending subliminal messages to the children, right?
Right. Hmm.
That hopefully their subconscious picks up, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so let's say the child now is 4 going on 10 years old. What are some of the
Hmm.
things that you incorporated with your children during that phase?
Okay, so definitely books, right? The books
Hmm.
that you choose are very important. We actually came upon here in DC, there's a fantastic aftercare program called Mommy's TLC that's always been about social justice,
Okay.
unapologetically. And so these decisions, right? The books that we had at home, um, who the kids were surrounded by, their environment necessarily being capoeira, you
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is just what we do,
Hmm.
right? This is and back to values, right?
Hmm.
Like, who are we as a family?
Hmm.
um I think so the books, um so it's about striking a balance, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's there are a lot of books about our struggles, whether it's indigenous struggles, Latinx struggles, Black
Hmm.
struggles.
Right.
And those are important to tell because I do think it's in the spirit of preparedness that we expose our children to those stories.
Gotcha.
Also, we want joyful books,
Hmm.
just Black, brown people living life. You
Mm.
know what I mean? And what happens when a Black child gets angry? Just like we give that latitude to white kids to express themselves
Hmm.
emotionally in different ways, we want to expose them to that, right? Instead of the story always being about the struggle.
I
One
see.
thing I want to pause and say, and I know we talked about this, Peter,
Hmm.
it's incredibly unjust that families of color, especially those who are awakened and are, you know, are engaging in what a racialized society means and preparing the kids this way.
Hmm.
It is incredibly unjust and incredibly sad and heartbreaking to have these conversations with our children.
Yeah.
You know,
Indeed. 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 It.
pause.
Yeah. 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 It is exhausting. And my child is just 5 years old, um, and go back to your point about books. The best way I can start with her is really through books.
Mhm.
Is to she has every single book I could find, particularly for like a young black female child about their
That's
hair.
right. Hmm.
She loves this book called Hair Love. You've seen the
Hey,
videos I've made where
yes.
we recreated the actual short film. But I don't want to lose the point of um, exposing our child or children rather to other cultures, even if you can't be around other cultures.
Right.
We're saying books are a really great place to start.
Absolutely. And another thing about the grief as a parent
Yeah,
that is present when we
yeah,
have to start engaging them in conversations about people not liking them or the world
right.
possibly being unsafe is that fear of loss of innocence. And
Yeah.
this is very personal. Like, I had no context, and what I took away from that,
Hmm.
from my community, we the way I grew up, there was a lot of colorism, there was a lot of
Mm.
anti-Blackness, there was reticence to talk about race. So, you know, we parent either with or against our parenting.
Yeah.
I definitely was like, we're going to talk about this because
Hmm.
I don't ever want you to feel like you're crazy or what is this feeling? I
Hmm.
want you to hear it from me so that if you feel that from somebody, especially someone that's supposed to care about you, you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
know what it is and you can come to me. That being said,
what age did that start? What age did you start talking to your
well,
children?
that's the thing. We're already talking about it in books, or, you know, when
I
we were
see,
going to Latinx, like conservative Latinx environments,
Yeah.
you know, I wouldn't necessarily have to say, you know, folks aren't used to Black people, or they believe only what they see on TV. And, you know, TV is incredibly unfair to Black people,
Right.
you know? So if you feel anything is off, you let me know, you
I
let
see.
your father know.
I see.
So so innocence, there definitely is a loss of innocence.
And so,
And I do know friends who were
yeah.
protected, right? Who can say, you know, I have West African friends who grew up here in the DMV. We're in Washington, D.C., the greater D.C. area, and we're able to live without the conversation about race and difference well into their teens, and are thankful for it. So I want to say that there's no one way to do this.
Yeah.
But inevitably, there's a moment where there's the loss of innocence,
I
whether
see.
it's at 5 or 14. And I think that's a very personal decision
I
from
see.
family to family. And I do think that what helps is that when you decide to do that, that it reflects, you know, your values, and that you do it in the spirit of preparedness.
I see.
For families who go camping and hiking, we know that we have to coach our children on what it's like to be out in the wilderness.
Right.
And this is its own type of wilderness.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
it's in the spirit of preparedness that we tackle this.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the reality is that, and you're indeed correct. You know, as you expose your children to different things, there is the risk that, of course, that they will be exposed to something that perhaps they're different.
Yeah.
You know, and they'll start to question, well, why am I different? Why does this person? So you're saying that, if I'm trying to make sure that I hear you correctly,
Yeah.
is that you're saying that be prepared as you start to expose them, that you have to deal with these uncomfortable discussions.
Well, thank you. Uncomfortable discussions. I think this might be helpful. You know how we have mission statements
Yes.
and value statements as organizations?
Yes.
It's a wonderful tool as a family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful tool as a family. And I would say, in terms of value statement, consider these, right? Because we're all being called to be anti-racist. So what does it mean to fold in anti-racist values into your family? And there are some nuances on how this works, whether you're a white family, a non-Black family of color, or Black family. But in general, right? Most of us share a value of kindness, right?
Right.
You fold in justice. We're a family who believes in justness and fairness, right? We're a family that believes in joy. And I think for families of color, joy is resistance, right? Another value that can really inform conversations about race, but also conversations about sexuality, conversations about differences in personalities, is we embrace difficult conversations.
Gotcha.
You know, and that becomes an umbrella for all the tough things about the human experience. The human experience is tough.
The human experience is complicated. It is gut-wrenching. It is something that we try to simplify it in these little textbooks, and the reality is that it is incredibly complex. So you're saying, so really what you're saying is to start your children out from an early age to embrace the notion of social justice.
Right. And look, let me tell you this. If you're ever on a playground, and I know you know this.
Yes.
From 3 to 5,
I already
you
know
will
where you're
hear
going.
this.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
Yes. Yes. Or mine.
Mine. Or he took that from me. Or it was my turn. So honestly, the notion of justice and fairness comes early in the human experience. And let's not forget our own experiences. If we kind of, you know, cleanse these adult floodings of responsibilities and take ourselves back to that playground.
Right.
early on, we knew when something felt unfair.
Right.
So there's a natural opening from 3 to 5, depending on your specific kiddo and,
Right.
where
Right.
they
Right.
are, because we all develop differently, and that's
Right.
fine. But I'm saying more or less between 3 or 5,
Mm-hmm.
you can use that language. You can say,
Mm-hmm.
you know how it's not fair sometimes when people take something away from you because they
Right.
want it? Well,
Right.
there's an unfairness that exists
Mm-hmm.
and has existed,
Gotcha.
right? One more thing I want to say when you have this conversation. You're a human being too, and you're the authority, right? You're the
Mm-hmm.
big person.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you have an opportunity to model what it means to be an emotional being.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're emotional about having to describe this unjust world to your child, it's not the time to break down. You want to do that with your support system, your therapist.
Yes.
But it is okay. I would argue that it is okay to say, this makes me sad.
Mm-hmm.
This makes me angry.
Right.
Because your child's going to feel sad and angry.
Yeah. And that's a
And you
really
don't
good
want,
point. Yeah.
you don't want them to feel like something's wrong with them because they're sad or angry. Like sometimes we want to present like we're in control,
Right.
but
Right.
it's an opportunity to model. This makes me sad. This
Yeah.
makes
And
me angry.
yeah, and that's a really good point, because if you're a child caseworker and you're confronted with a child who's abused, the last thing you want to do is to break down in front of that child. As you're
Right.
discussing the abuse, is
Yeah.
you want to show that child strength, that I'm here for you, I understand what you're dealing with, and we're going to start the process of getting you help.
That's right.
So you raise a very, very good point. I want to sort of summarize a little bit about what we've said
Sure,
so
sure.
far, so we're on
Yeah.
track. You talked about, one of the things that you said was, if you're a mom to be, I mean, if I'm hearing correctly, expose yourselves to things earlier on that may be different from you, because
Check yourself.
check yourself.
Really. Go
Yeah.
into spaces.
Yeah.
What's going on with your breathing?
Yeah.
What's going on with your heart rate?
Mm-hmm.
Are you scattered? Are you yawning a lot? Yawning is a sign of nervousness, actually.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, yes,
So,
yes,
so,
yes.
so in essence, go into a space where you are the minority.
Hey,
You know,
do the work.
Do the work. Exactly, do the work.
Yeah.
If you're in a place like DC, there are tons of bookstores that deal with issues around African history, African American history. There are indigenous stores that carry stuff on indigenous art.
Right.
There's a woman that I met. I'm a Jamaican, so I have many hustles. So,
Hey.
as I'm in school here, I was Ubering once, and I picked up this wonderful woman who was from Korea, and freaked me out because she spoke fluent Spanish, right?
Yeah.
But not just that, she has an art store, and I think her Instagram, I think, is like art. God, I'll put the link. I'll put the name. I'll find it. But she helps Latin American artists she creates galleries for them, essentially stress and market their products for them. And she was just sort of telling me, I said, how did you get into that? She goes, I was okay with being uncomfortable,
How about that?
Yeah, I wanted to learn. So, again, be uncomfortable. If you're thinking about being a parent, if you are pregnant, go into these spaces, feel how you feel, embrace the emotions, and eventually, what I tell people, you realize that emotion has no control over you.
Yeah.
So the second thing you mentioned was, going after that, was you said that we should really, when the child is born, the kiddo is young, let them see different people, different colors, different images. And in essence, that child becomes used to it, becomes normal to that child.
And again, specifying in authority.
In
Let
authority.
them see you
Yeah.
go to people different than you with questions that only they can answer. Yes.
Good point.
Yeah.
And then as the cognitive ability of the child develops, start to expose them to, and I think this goes also for people of color in general, for anyone, expose your children to things that look different from them, or things that affirm who they are. In my case, I do buy a lot of books, don't ask me why, about issues around Black hair for my daughter. It's hard for her to embrace that. But she also loves Anna and Elsa. You know, we joke around and she has Elsa powers, you know?
Yeah.
And Elsa is blonde hair, blue eyed, right? But
Yeah.
Elsa is not seen as the damsel in distress anymore, right?
Hey, we needed that.
We
Yeah.
needed that. You know, she loves Moana, right? Moana is a
Oh, that's my
Pacific
girl.
Islander, right?
Yeah.
So they get to see different people, as you said, in positions of authority and strength that doesn't necessarily look like them. And it's okay. The third thing you're saying is become, as that child starts to develop, be comfortable with having the very uncomfortable discussions, right? And then also, am I summarizing
No,
correctly?
I'm like pleased. You're going to be my editor. Talk
Yes.
about another side hustle. Yes.
And then the next thing you talked about was this notion of making sure that as we're having these discussions, create a mission statement, if you will. I mean, you went as far as an organizational statement to say, as a family, we are social justice advocates. We will call out BS when we see it. We're not afraid.
I'm going to bring some old school language. You know this? In this house.
Yes.
In mi casa.
Yes.
So we channel that from our ancestors that let us know clearly what happens in this house.
Right.
Yeah. We say in this house, we're about social justice. Yeah.
Right. And so that's these are great tools earlier on, right? And so what I want to do is end the discussion here, but we're going to have a part 2 to this where of course, we talk as the child starts to, because obviously at 5 or 6 or 7, they fully don't get it just yet. You know, they do notice some things, but it's what is this guy, this one, there's all these various psychoanalyst people from back in the day, the Piagets of the world, or the Ericksons of the world. They say humans develop in stages. I think kids are smarter than we realize, you know.
And they're evolving.
That's the
thing. We're like these stages of development, especially the racial ones, are going to be old news very soon. No disrespect, but just say
But we also. But I do see they have a lot of validity in how they've been able to analyze these things. Like one author, I think his name was it? I don't know, it was Piaget. He talked about the notion of children thinking in magical terms, right?
Yeah.
And my daughter still does it at 5. I'm like, you know, so you see that. But I want to get a little deeper in the next discussion in terms of how when they start to really ask the questions now, you know, why does this person look different than me? Or what do we do at that point, right? So look out for the next connection here with Miss Maria Luz. It's been very, very informative so far. And
thank you all for listening. Thanks, Peter, for the opportunity. Always invigorating.
Definitely. And look out for it coming very, very soon after this one. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.